Yeah, it's interesting. Is Mark Elbroch Cougar Conundrum?
Yes, yeah, I endorsed the back of his book actually.
Okay, so
He quote from me.
I read it as well, and I I I'd need someone like you to talk to him because
Yeah,
I would just want to argue.
yeah, yeah, yep.
It,
And
it
Mark
was
loved that.
it
Mark
didn't
liked.
seem like the middle way to me.
Yeah, Mark is extremely bright, and he likes to challenge State Fish and Wildlife Agency for primarily a lack of inclusivity in decision making. And he's right there. It's primarily white males in most fish and wildlife rod and gun clubs. And you look around, they're older white males. I worry about the future. Until backcountry hunters and anglers came along, they're full of men and women, and they're young, and they're meeting in brew pubs. They're very vital, very engaged, right? But prior to that, boy, the hunting community was maturing pretty rapidly, right? And the meetings are pretty small. So Mark's challenge, and we've debated, had fun discussing that. How do we as hunters share decision making at the table, the commissions, with people with just women, much less another gender, much less another race, or someone who doesn't believe in hunting? How
Yeah.
do we share that decision making power? So his whole theme in that book is, well, he's got the biology in there. He's top-notch scientist, but he likes to poke and make you think that there isn't much inclusivity in managing big game, not just lions. So that's just my opinion, but that's why I enjoyed it, because it does make you think. It's like,
Okay.
okay, you know,
Yeah, sometimes those hard books are the
yep,
ones which make you think.
yep,
I felt like it was the political slant was so strongly opposing mine that it was at
yep.
times, it's difficult to
Yeah,
interact with
Mark's a
information.
hunter, and and he's a dad, and he's a friend of mine, and but he's also very good at thought provoking
Mhm.
discussions and challenging the status quo, which frankly, as hunters and as carnivore hunters, we're going to need that, right, to stay relevant and maintain that privilege into the future. How are we? And that's I've always struggled with that too. As hunters, how do we become more inclusive? And at not necessarily hunting, but at the decision making table of who gets to take what. And that's the Fish and Wildlife Commissions.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
That's for young folks like you.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's hard. So there's a sort of, I felt like one of the fundamental dynamics of your book was this relationship between being an outsider and being a local in places,
Yeah.
whether it was when you first moved to Montana and you're getting in bar fights, or when you go down to Patagonia and you're talking with this Leoneros, and they're like these hard, leathery
Yep.
Patagonian lion hunters who live to stack up lion heads. Uh, it, and partially this relates to what we were just talking about with Mark Elbroch. How do we involve now? There's many stakeholders, outside of the area that these things are taking place. For instance, Portland decides what Oregon does to some extent, and how do we balance that
Yeah.
conversation between the locals who say, you out there don't understand what's going on in here. I think rightfully so. The closer you are to a place, the better you understand it to some extent. But also the fact that we live in a democracy where everyone in Oregon has a vote.
And that, yeah, that's a good point. So Mark talks about local collaboratives. He uses an example, one chapter of a lion working group in Missoula. I was actually sat in on those as well. Um, and I think if we broaden, if we make the tent a little bit larger and invite some of the Portland, Seattle values in a locally led collaborative group, and that's what I do now with the land trust. There's lots of locally led groups that ranchers lead with land trusts on land conservation and issues, right? I think the group carries a lot of power back to a capital in LA, a capital in Oregon, a capital in Washington, because you had a bigger tent. You had some values on there that are similar to what's in the urban areas, but the group came to, give and take, and came with a recommendation. It's going to carry. And I think that'll save hunting in some instances, but it's very difficult to invite people that don't agree with you or that aren't like you into a decision making, a power sharing environment, right? But we have to do that. And it has to have, particularly with carnivore bear and lion hunting and wolf.
Yeah.
Wolves are different. Wolves are off the charts. Boy, people's brains turn off when it comes to wolves. That's why my
Yeah.
hair's gray.
Yeah.
It was blonde
Yeah.
before wolves took off.
Jim, do you need to go at 4 or can we keep talking?
Yeah, you got probably 10
5
minutes.
minutes? Okay. So what were we talking about?
Oh, yeah, the urban values. I think we need to figure out a way to get a more diverse group and to make hunting type recommendations, and then it'll mitigate some of the anti hunting values in the capitals where the decisions are made, because they know that you'll have champions that aren't necessarily hunters in that group that brings those recommendations forward, and that'll carry weight the same way Houndmen carried weight, and from a rural and local perspective, in Montana, in a more rural state.
Yeah, it seems to be about reaching out, and I like bringing more people into the tent. Uh, the animal rights groups, we call them animal rights groups. I don't know what to call
Yeah,
them. The side
yeah,
which
yeah,
essentially
yeah.
wants no hunting, uh, not just predator hunting. I think the end goal, there really is a sort of extreme perspective on both sides, but on that side is, to the point that meat should not be allowed, and we're a long
Yeah.
ways from that, and it's not going to happen. But
Now, some of
uh,
that's nonsensical. I mean, I grew up I was born farm country of Iowa. Humans eat, they need food, right? And not everyone's going
right.
to be a vegetarian. We're going to eat meat.
But I
And
think behind these big animal rights organizations, it's not, those are not crazy ideas there, although the public will is not there.
yeah,
The fear of the hunting community is that, okay, well, we bring more people into the tent, we start, changing things to make it more acceptable for
mhm.
Portland, and there's this fear of death by 1,000 cuts, a slippery slope to, first it will be trapping, then and to some extent it is happening, right? It might be
Yeah, oh
happening
yeah.
regardless of what we do, but uh, there's a fear that any concession will be, is the beginning of the end. And how do we
Yeah,
navigate that?
I agree, but that's kind of a dangerous position to take, because like in California, you already lost it. In Oregon and Washington, you've lost half of it,
Mhm.
And so there's really that there's really no risk. There's only gains that could happen, maybe to get a little bit of that back, right? And a trial basis. I hear you. I think for deer and elk hunting, this movement toward farm to table and chemical free meats is the best thing. All these kids, men and women and people from big cities, all want to kill a deer now and take adult hunter ed. I think it's wonderful. I
Yeah.
mean, when as hunters, when we often our hands are the only thing that touches that deer or elk from the time it dies to the time it's processed in the field, to the time it's cut up, to the time you carry it out, to the time you wrap it, label it, and stick it in the freezer, all the way until you serve it to friends and family. Only your fingers have touched that animal, compared to, industrial cattle and other meats that have hormones and chemicals or whatever,
Yeah.
and so there's a real demand, a real desire to connect to nature that way for younger demographics to get their own food. And I think that is incredibly powerful to keep hunting as a legal management tool.
Mhm.